Likutei Sicha is Chelik Chaf, the second Sicha for Parshas Vayechi. This Sicha is a fascinating insight into the reason why Yosef and Levi didn't actually carry Yaakov's remains to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. As an introduction to better familiarize ourselves with some of the concepts that we mentioned in the Sicha, according to Torah law, Shluchai shel Adam kimoisei, literally translated the agent, the messenger of a person, someone tasked to do something on someone's behalf, has the legal status of the person himself. Meaning, if I send someone to do something for me, a mitzvah which I can send someone to do for me, then it's not like he's doing it for me. It's like I am actually doing it. I am actually there. Another concept, the idea of shutfus, the idea of a partnership. When two people enter into a partnership, the way it's viewed by Torah is not that each one owns a complete 50%, but rather each one has a part in the 100%. In other words, they're partners in everything. And likewise, when people join together to complete a task, even though one does one part of the task and the other does another part of the task, but they all really have an equal ownership, so to speak, on each part of that task, and they all together equally own it. One final thing, when Bnei Yisrael traveled through the desert after they left Mitzrayim, we know that they were divided into 4 groups, or 4 degolim, flags literally. Each one had another color code, and so on. And one was on the east, one's on the west, one's on the south, one's on the north. And then Shevet Levi was in the middle. Another thing, talking about Shevet Levi, the tribe of Levi was actually divided into 3 groups, the 3 families, Gershon, Kahas, and Merari. The one that stands out in this Sicha is Kahas. Kahas, that family was tasked with carrying the artifacts, meaning the actual vessels within the Mishkan, within the tabernacle, most specifically and highlighted by the Aron, the Ark of the Covenant. Let's get into the Sicha. So on the Pasuk, which says, Vayisu oisei banov, that it says that his sons, the sons of Yaakov, after his passing, carried him, they transported him to the land of Canaan to be buried there. Rashi explains that when it says his sons carried him, what does this mean exactly? And let me explain, because typically when the Torah says one's sons, it could also mean by extension all of their descendants, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. So Rashi tells us no. Here it means specifically his sons. In fact, Yaakov Avinu gave them specific instructions in what formation they should carry this his coffin. And he basically split them up into 4 groups. He said 3 on each side. And this was exactly the same formation, the same division, the same setup as was many years later after they left Mitzrayim and traveled through the desert. Then Rashi continues and he says, Yaakov gave him another specific instruction, and that is pertaining to Yosef and Levi. And he said the following, Levi, my son Levi, he should not carry my coffin. Why? Because in the future, he will be the one to carry Hashem's ark. He shouldn't be carried. It's not befitting that he should carry my coffin. And then he said about Yosef. Yosef also shouldn't carry my coffin because Yosef is a king. Instead, Yaakov says, Menashe and Ephraim, they will be the ones to carry it in the place of Yosef and Levi. Now, there's a few questions that immediately arise here. Number one, we know that in the beginning of the Parsha, Yaakov Avinu made Yosef swear. He made him take an oath. Unisasani mimitzrayim, that you will carry me out of Egypt. You will take me out of Egypt. And here Yaakov is preventing him, or so it seems, to actively carry through on his oath, on the promise that he made. How do we reconcile that? Another thing, in regards to Levi, the reason he gave why Levi should not be the one to transport his coffin doesn't seem to make sense. Because the fact that Levi, the tribe of Levi, will be carrying Hashem's Aron, Hashem's ark, that is many, many years later, 4 generations later. They're going to be so long in Egypt, and there's going to be a process of enslavement, then redemption, then building the Mishkan. Why should he be prevented? Why should he be deprived from such an important mitzvah of carrying his father's coffin to be buried? It doesn't make sense. And if we really think about it, thinking of the future, we can counter this with a very powerful question. You see, Moshe Rabbeinu, who not only is from the tribe of Levi, but in fact he was directly from the family of Kahas, who were the ones who were actually tasked with carrying the ark. They were the ones who actually did it, not by extension, but this was his family. He was a direct member of that family. And yet, what do we find? That for 40 years, from the moment they left Mitzrayim until his passing, right before they entered the Holy Land, Moshe Rabbeinu was the one who carried and transported Yosef HaTzadik's remains. So why should it be an issue for him to transport? Why should it be an issue for his grandfather Levi to transport Yaakov's remains? In other words, how does that make sense? Then we have another question. Rashi himself points out that Yaakov Avinu specifically made a point that he wants only his actual sons to carry his remains, not his grandsons. So how then did Menashe and Ephraim, how did they come in place of Yosef and Levi? They are not his sons, they are his grandsons. Now this answer could be answered with what we already explained in the introduction, since we know that Shluchai Shel Adam Kimoisai, according to Jewish law, one's agent serves as the person himself and has that legal status of the person himself. So we can say that when Menashe and Ephraim, by them helping transport Yaakov Avinu's remains, they were not acting on their behalf. They were not Menashe and Ephraim. They were actually in the place of Yosef and Levi. Okay, that can reconcile it. But the question is, what exactly is their connection to Yosef and Levi? Now, the connection to Yosef is understood. They're his sons. But why exactly would Menashe and Ephraim, or one of them, represent Levi specifically? What is their inherent connection? Maybe one of Levi's sons should have carried it, or someone else. So the Rebbe says the explanation in all of this is as follows. The beginning of the enslavement, of the oppression in Mitzrayim, happened only after Yaakov's passing. More specifically, as long as Yaakov was in Mitzrayim, not only alive, but even in body, just his body, there was no possibility, there was no room for any enslavement, for any oppression whatsoever. Even moreover, we know that when Yaakov came, as Yosef promised by the word of Parai, that he says, "Ve'etna lachem es tuv eretz Mitzrayim." I'm going to give you the best of Egypt. The Jews had the best of the best. So long that Yaakov was there was no enslavement whatsoever. On the contrary. So it's understood that what is the inherent idea? What happened with the transport of Yaakov's body, Yaakov's remains out of Egypt? That set in motion the Shibud Mitzrayim. That becomes the beginning of the enslavement, of the oppression. And now we can appreciate why Yosef and Levi were not supposed to have a direct involvement in doing this, in carrying Yaakov's remains. Because Yosef and Levi have a common point, Nekuda Mishutefes, between them, which both of them were beyond, or the term that Rebbe uses, higher than. They were beyond any whatsoever enslavement, any whatsoever oppression of Mitzrayim. And therefore both of them also they didn't give room for it, at least during their lifetimes. As it says in the Medrash, quote, that as long as Yosef was alive, there was no whatsoever burden of Egypt on them, let alone oppression, not even the burden of them. In other words, they were totally, absolutely free. Once Yosef passed away, they already started to feel a little burden of the leadership, of the authority of Egypt. Then it says in regards to Levi, if you look in the Chumash Shmos, in Parshas Ve'era, chapter 6, verse 16, over there it tells us how old Levi was when he passed away. And Rashi asks, why does he tell us only about Levi and not the other tribes? He doesn't mention anything. We don't know necessarily how old the other tribes were when they passed away. So Rashi tells us that the Torah is pointing this out in order to tell us, to give us an idea, so we can calculate exactly how long was the duration of the enslavement, of the oppression. Why? Because so long that one of the sons of Yaakov was alive, there was no enslavement, there was no oppression. So from this we can calculate, says Rashi, since Levi lived the longest, and from his passing, that's when the enslavement began. So we see that Levi, so long that he was alive, he didn't give room for any enslavement. Moreover, we find that not only did they not allow for any enslavement, for any oppression to actually kick in, but we find that even during that time period, during the era of when the rest of the Yidden were being treated so harshly and oppressed and working back-breaking labor, Shevet Levi did not partake in that. They were not enslaved. They were separate. They were the ones studying Torah. So therefore we can understand, we can appreciate why, quote, Levi shouldn't carry, quote, Yosef shouldn't carry. Because the whole idea of carrying Yaakov's remains to Eretz Yisrael was setting in motion the enslavement, which had no connection, and to Yosef and Levi, they were beyond it. And that we can see actually in the words that Yaakov said, the reason he gave, because he says, since Levi will be carrying the Aron. The Mefarshim explain that the idea of carrying the Aron, meaning the Ark of the Covenant, is inherent with the idea of being beyond any whatsoever golus, beyond any whatsoever enslavement. And likewise by Yosef. What is the reason that Yaakov gave? Because he's a king. What is inherently the idea of a king? The idea of a king is that nobody has any rule over him. Nobody has any control over him. He controls everything. And now we can better appreciate and we can answer the question, how is it that Moshe Rabbeinu did carry a corpse, that he did carry a dead body with him for all the 40 years? The answer is very simple. Because transporting Yosef's body to Eretz Yisrael was inherently not only, it wasn't connected to enslavement, on the contrary, the whole idea of carrying it is because like Yosef himself made the Yidden take an oath that when Hashem remembers you and takes you out of here, you're going to carry my remains. So it was part and parcel of Geula, of redemption. So therefore, Moshe, not only he could, but he had to carry, and who else than the one who was tasked with carrying the holiest of things? Because this is the greatest symbol of Geula. However, now we have to understand, if we just made the point, we just made the argument that Yosef and Levi have no connection and are beyond any whatsoever enslavement, any whatsoever connection to the oppression of what's going to be in Mitzrayim, then if so, why do they need to have shluchim to represent them? In other words, they should have been totally excluded from this whole matter. Why do they have Menashe and Ephraim representing them as agents, as shluchim, and it becomes like them? So the Rebbe says to answer this, we'll preface it by asking another question and answering it. The question really is, this whole idea of the enslavement in Mitzrayim, the oppression, didn't just come on its own. It didn't just happen to be, but rather it was pre-planned. In fact, it was all dictated by Hashem. It was already all told to Avram Avinu way back then that this is what's going to happen. Your descendants will be enslaved in a foreign land. They will work hard, but afterwards they will leave with great riches. So the question really becomes, wait, how did Shevet Levi have the right to wiggle their way out and not be part of it when Hashem said all your descendants means all of them? Moreover, maybe perhaps by them not being part of the enslavement, they could have perhaps even jeopardized the outcome, because it says this will happen, then that will happen. They will be enslaved, then they will leave with great riches. Well, maybe if not all of them are enslaved, maybe not all of them can leave with great riches, or maybe none of them. The answer is the fact that Shevet Levi, that the tribe of Levi did not actually work back-breaking labor, doesn't mean that they weren't part of the sum total of the idea of being in Mitzrayim and what it was supposed to accomplish. In fact, we know many years later when Shlomo Melech built the Beis HaMikdash, and in his davening, in his prayer, you can see it in Melachim Aleph, chapter 8, verse 51, Shlomo Melech refers to Mitzrayim. He says, you took them out from Kur Har Barzel, from the iron furnace. What does an iron furnace do? Yes, it burns the ore, but what does it do? It's there to refine it, to make it pure, that it should be a pure metal, whatever the metal may be. Depending on the metal, that's how great the temperature is. But what is the idea of Mitzrayim? The idea of Mitzrayim wasn't to punish the Yidden, to hurt them, to make them suffer. The idea was to prepare them for Matan Torah. So they, meaning most of the Yidden, actually went through the back-breaking labor of it, which was meant and was supposed to refine them. Shevet Levi's role was also part of it, but just they played a different role. Their role was that they had to be the spiritual leaders. They had to be the ones to guide the Yidden. That not only the back-breaking labor shouldn't break them, but in fact that they should be able to grow from it. That it should accomplish the feat, that we should accomplish the purpose. Because if they wouldn't have that spiritual guidance, maybe they would have all collapsed. They would all have broken, and then it would have defeated the whole purpose, the whole reason for them being in Mitzrayim. So because of the idea of shutfus, as we said in the introduction, partnership, Shevet Levi had an equal partnership. True, they didn't suffer the actual back-breaking labor, but they were equal partners in it. Albeit they played a different role. It just expressed itself differently, but each one had a part in the sum total of what the enslavement of Mitzrayim was supposed to accomplish. And then we see the same thing later with Shevet Levi. After the Yidden received the Torah, Shevet Levi is again designated to be the teachers, to be the guides, and to be the representative of all the Yidden in serving the Beis HaMikdash. All the Yidden have to serve in the Beis HaMikdash, right? It was a partnership. Shevet Levi actually served for them as the Kohanim, as the Leviim, and the Yidden supported them. So you see the same idea. And now we can appreciate why Yosef and Levi, although they were beyond the enslavement in Mitzrayim, but they needed to have a part in it. They need to have at least their agents to represent them. You see, although they themselves were not there, but they had to be part of it in some way. Why do they have to be part of it in some way? In order to inject koyach, to give the strength, to give the power, to give it, that the Yidden should be able to fulfill the purpose of it and not be collapsed by it, and not be overcome by it. And therefore they chose specifically Menashe and Ephraim. Remember we asked, what is the connection between Menashe and Ephraim to Levi? Because Menashe and Ephraim, when we study their names, when we appreciate what they're about, we'll see how they connect specifically to Yosef and to Levi, in a very direct manner. You see, Yosef, what is the idea of Yosef? Who is Yosef? So it says, Eile Toildos Yaakov Yosef. And if you stop right there, what it's saying is that Yaakov gets expressed in Yosef. That means whatever Yaakov was about was expressed in Yosef. And where do we see this especially? After Yosef was brought down to Mitzrayim. Hurad Mitzrayim. Over there, in a revealed manner, we saw that he had the aspects of Yaakov. That he didn't let it in any way bother him. He didn't let in any way, God forbid, bring him down. Not only didn't bring him down, but he brought everybody up. And therefore, Mitzrayim cannot have a control over him. Where do you see this? In which of his sons do you see this expressed? In Menashe. When he named his son Menashe, the Torah tells us, because he says, Ki nashani Elokim es kol amoli es that Hashem was like somehow, God was making me forget all my toil and my hope, my father's home. In other words, Menashe represents that idea, that fight, that struggle that Yosef had, and he expressed it in naming his son, not to forget who he is, not to forget his father, and to continue and remain being that aspect of Yaakov. So this is the direct connection between Menashe and Yosef, and Menashe represents Yosef. What is the connection of Ephraim to Levi? Because when he came to name his son Ephraim, on the other hand, what did he say? Ki hifrani Elokim beresani. Hashem made me fruitful. Hashem made me grow, even in the land of my oppression. That what? That even when he was in Mitzrayim, in the darkness of Mitzrayim, yet he was able to be successful. He was able to grow. He was able to fulfill his task. This is exactly what the idea of Levi was. Like we said before, that Levi was there, and their purpose was that during the harshest of times, not only the Yidden shouldn't break and they shouldn't collapse, but that they should grow from it. They should achieve the heights that they have to achieve. This is the idea of Levi, and that's why Ephraim represented Levi. What is the directive for us? What is the lesson for us? Every single Yid is compared to Yosef. In the Pasuk in Tehillim it says, Noihei Katzon Yosef. Hashem guided us like the sheep, Yosef, meaning he refers to us as Yosef. That means that every single Yid has the power to stand firm like a king and not allow the Golus, not allow any aspect of the Golus to take hold on us, to take control of us. And moreover, or after reaching and achieving that, then we have the aspect of Levi, which is, quote, to carry the Arim, to rise above, to grow with holiness, even, or maybe perhaps because, not only in spite of, but because of Galus, which the ultimate point of this will be when Mashiach comes.